again, everybody. I'm Dean O'Neill.
And I'm Nick Robinson.
Nick, this is a kind of a neat thing we're doing here. This is a special edition podcast.
That's correct.
It's called On the Ground, and it will be a series that will have many series in the future. We don't know when or we don't know how, but we're calling it On the Ground. And why we're calling it On the Ground is you had kind of a special study tour a couple of weeks ago, and people were asking, where's Nick and things like that. And so you decided that it was big enough to where you needed to share.
Yeah, and I expect we'll have at least 2 mini series, because next year I'm going to do another trip that is similar to this, only bigger and farther away with the same program that I'm in. And honestly, part of the impetus behind this is I've gone on this trip. I spent 8 days traveling, 2 of the days focused on travel, and then 6 days focused on seeing and learning about life at the border and the experience of immigrants. And, I walked away thinking, I need to tell people what I've seen.
Sure.
Not because I've witnessed the answer.
Sure.
Not because I'm coming back with any policy recommendations.
Right.
But because there are the full story of what's happening in people's lives is hard to hear. There aren't always people talking about all of the angles on something. For instance, when we talk about immigration this far removed from kind of border crossings, often it seems to be divided down partisan lines, and there's name calling and people's positions. We create straw man positions for people and call names rather than talking to actually solve and address problems.
Sure.
We talk at each other, or we yell at each other, rather than thinking about things more fully, more holistically, trying to be on the same team. One of the things I always tell people in a marriage is, as I'm doing premarital counseling, it's like when you have a problem, the other person isn't your problem. Most of the time. Right. There are exceptions.
Sure.
But if you come across these problems, these kind of daily problems in life, it's going to help if you're on the same side. You see yourselves on the same team trying to solve the problem. Maybe you have different solutions, but if you can identify the problem that you're really trying to solve and attack it together, you're going to be way better off than if you spend time attacking each other. And so the point of this podcast is for me to say what I saw. I think is going to be beneficial to people and hopefully help people in their own minds think broadly about this issue that is certainly a hot button issue in the United States right now.
Right. So let's be clear again, so everybody at home knows that I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You only want to discuss and tell everyone what you saw.
Yeah, I don't have any policy recommendations. I don't have any vote blue or vote red recommendations coming out of this. What I want to do is, this is what I saw taking place. These are the stories that I heard, and I want you all to hear them because going was part of my job too.
Sure. So again, what you discussed, what you saw, yes, it might fall into this area of discussion in the world today, or political policy or anything like that. But that's not what we're doing here.
Now, Dean,
we're just doing that.
I hear a little anxiety in your voice.
Yes, I know.
Well, but I think we should address that because you're feeling it for a reason. Because this is a hot button issue.
It is.
And
it is.
As churches and as culture, we're not always good at talking about them. Right. And certainly, our purpose behind this is not to make a bunch of people angry.
Right.
That we're not trying to come and tell people, I don't know enough about policy. I don't know enough about the preferred future that we're going to work towards together to say that this is what we need to be doing and you're wrong, or you're an awful person for thinking whatever you think, whatever, straw man I think that you think. Right. It's a storytelling process.
Perfect.
I went on this trip, and storytelling was actually one of the focuses of this process. But before I get onto that, what I want to do is tell people why I went. Because this was not just something that I initiated. It wasn't, Pastor Nick wants to go on this, take this trip to the border, and it's really a vacation, but he's going to, make believe it's something else. And he's going to go by himself or anything like that. This was, so I'm participating in a thing called the Wabash Pastoral Leadership Program. It's funded by the Lilly Endowment, which funds all kinds of great things going on in communities in Indiana and around the United States. And a third of their endowment is all about investing funds into healthy faith communities. They want pastors to be healthy. They want churches to be healthy because they believe that strong churches really help communities thrive. And they believe that healthy and strong pastors help churches be strong, help faith communities be strong. And so they are investing in churches and they are investing in pastors. Here at Asbury, we have benefited from the Lilly Endowment's work because one of the things that they support is called the Center for Congregations that issues grants and does some training programs for people, for people of faith and to learn and deepen their skills on certain kinds of things. So this is funded through a program that wants to see people thrive. This particular program is trying to help pastors be able to lead outside of the walls of the church, because we believe that Jesus goes outside the walls of the church, right? A lot of his ministry has taken place outside of synagogues in the New Testament. And that's where so many big decisions are happening in the world that are affecting our local communities and even beyond our local community. So how can pastors be equipped to sit down at the table with the mayor or the director of the United Way or a CEO of a local company or the Chamber of Commerce and be able to talk to some of these issues? So immigration is one of the issues that this program is talking about. It meets, I think, 6 total times over the course of 2 years. And one of those meetings each year is a study tour. So this year we went to the border to talk about immigration. Next time we're going to meet in early December and we're going to talk about education in Indiana. So we're talking about this broad range of topics that really affects people's lives. So this tour was, how can we get on the ground and witness stories? Because usually in this program we have experts come and talk to us. So they meet us in a room and we sit around a table and have a conversation and see, PowerPoint presentations. But how can something come alive more? And how can experience something deepen our understanding and our learning versus, again, sitting in a room? It's kind of almost like it's that similar to that difference between like hearing about your faith in a sermon and then going and practicing your faith.
Right.
And so we weren't doing a lot of practicing necessarily. This wasn't a mission trip.
Right.
We didn't serve food to anybody or build any houses or preach any sermons. We were there just as people who were learning and
observing. Probably, yes.
Yeah. And so there were 12 pastors who were part of this program and then a couple of leaders that went with us. It kind of took me back to being a kid on a trip and like, we got chaperones.
Right.
It wasn't quite like that.
Right.
But we went down just to see and to learn. Any questions about why I went?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
I think you covered it. I guess my next statement or question would be tell us about the story. Tell us about your first day. And really, especially if you just, I don't know if you got off a bus or whatever you did, but what was what was your first feeling when you started?
Yeah, the first full day was really a travel day. I got up really early, went to the airport. The government was shut down, or there was government shut down. So we had no idea how long the lines were going to be at TSA and all those kinds of things.
Right.
I got through in no time at all. Never had a problem with TSA on this trip. Thankfully, fortunately. So we went, and then we flew from different airports because we're all from all over Indiana, all these pastors. And so 5 or 6 of us flew out of Indianapolis. And so we met, we had breakfast, we sat on an airplane for a while to Detroit, we walked around for a little bit, flew to San Antonio. So from San Antonio, we boarded some buses, went and stayed at a hotel called the Emily Morgan Hotel, which is right next to the Alamo.
Okay.
Which was going to be the site of kind of our first learning things on our first learning day of the tour.
Right.
We're going to go and do some things at the Alamo. And that's what we did. And so that night I saw, this is a personal note, not a learning note, but I saw the river walk at San Antonio for the first time.
Yes, it's very big. Yeah.
It was really cool. It was also like really touristy. So it was like this interesting clash of worlds because it's also kind of natural feeling because there's really big trees along big parts of it.
And every river walk in the United States is named after this river walk.
Yeah, it set the standard for river walks,
exactly.
for sure. Every community's like, man, they were so successful in their river walk. Let us do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's largely designed to entertain the people who are coming to the convention center, which is not very far away, and there's 10,000 hotel rooms there, and so it's meant to cater to all these people there for conventions. And it's walking distance from the Alamo, at least part.
Gotcha.
And so we stayed by the Alamo. We walked down to the Riverwalk for dinner, and then the next day we woke up and we met over right across the street at the Alamo. The Alamo is a really interesting place, and if you're from Indiana or somewhere not Texas, we've heard a lot of things about the Alamo. I think it is a place of cultural pride for the people of Texas, no doubt. So if you go to, I believe it's thealamo.org right now, there is an Alamo Plaza live cam. And so 24 hours a day, you can go look at the Alamo and see what's going on there.
All right.
And I think a lot of people are first surprised when they go to Alamo by the physical surroundings in a few ways. So the Alamo is actually a pretty small place. The kind of the church that where people hid at the end of the battle is pretty small. The inner sanctuary is smaller than Asbury's sanctuary. Sure. I would say. Certainly not much. Maybe the same size, but probably smaller.
Yep.
So it's a small place, but it's also surrounded by there's a Ripley's Believe It or Not across the street. There's a mall next door.
Sure.
It's surrounded by kind of this tourist trap kind of stuff. So it's this historical marker, this place where faith was was first started as a mission, and then where a battle was fought and part of a war.
Sure.
And then you can also go to Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Sure.
Or go to the Funhouse Mirror place.
Okay.
So it's this really unique place. And so all of this is, I think they chose to take us to the Alamo because it's this it's as interesting and as diverse and as hard to understand as immigration in some ways, but it's here in this physical form right in front of us.
Right. When we discussed the Alamo, obviously you brought up such a matter that I didn't even know. The Alamo was once technically in Mexico.
Yeah.
Correct?
So it would the Alamo. So the Battle of the Alamo. So one of the things that I think is most fascinating is the United States has taken the story of the Alamo and made it about the United States.
Right.
When it's actually very little about the United States. Many people, if you go to this website, you can also see all the named people that we know fought there and where they were from. Were they from England or Connecticut or Tennessee or Mexico or and so.
Which we're not downplaying that at all. It's just a matter that it really wasn't about the United States.
Right. And so what happened is Mexico. This area was Mexico, and then at some point, Mexico decides to outlaw slavery. Mm-hmm. And people's like, well, that's not what we want here in Texas. We want slavery. And so it was fought. The Battle of the Alamo and the war around it was fought so that Texas could be an independent country, an independent republic. So not so that it could be part of the United States, but it didn't want to be part of Mexico, and it wanted to be its own place. So that's the story behind the Alamo, and there's so many details on this website, and you can even read detailed descriptions of how the battle went and who died when and how it happened.
Right. I'm sure there are reenactments.
I'm sure
all kinds of things.
While we were there was someone firing a muzzle loader at 11:30. You could go see someone fire a muzzle loader rifle.
Right. It's wild.
And you could see the Texas Ranger guards walking around with all kinds of guns strapped to them too, and their cowboy hats. And so there were more armed guards at the Alamo than I expected. There were guards everywhere at the Alamo, because even as the Alamo is this tourist site, this historical site, it's also a place where people know that if they want to protest anything, people will pay attention to them.
Sure.
So there's we didn't see any protests there. We saw people, I believe, of Hawaiian descent playing large drums. There was a little stage off to one side, and so they're doing a public demonstration of
with the flame things and everything.
No, it wasn't. No flames, I don't think. Okay. If you're in Columbus and you've seen the taiko drummers, those drums kind of like that. Yeah. People playing big drums and kids and adults all doing it together.
Right. Well, and it's important getting back to just the how Texas didn't want to abolish slavery. They wanted slavery. They also wanted to be their own country.
Yeah.
So let's mention that too. I mean, that's always been a footnote in history that Texas didn't even want to be part of the United States.
Yeah.
So.
And, in some ways, people still say like Texas feels like its own country still.
Right.
And they, everything's better and bigger in Texas, and
Right.
you just have to go there to understand it. And I feel like I got a little glimpse of that while being in Texas. But, so it's got this complicated history. And so we went on what Elizabeth Coffey is her name, and she worked with someone else to design a labyrinth of sorts.
Right.
So a labyrinth you may have seen one before. Lots of times they're on the ground, and it almost looks like a maze, but it's not.
Sure.
Like you start one end, you just walk through it,
Right.
you turn around, walk all the way
For all
back through.
intents and purposes, it is a sort of maze.
Yeah, but there's only one way through. You can't get lost.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like the religious version is built to be this contemplative thing where you're walking in, and even though there's a line, it's hard to predict exactly where you're going to go and how it's going to turn, and it's like a metaphor for life and how close you feel to God, and then you end up in the center, and then you walk it all backwards, and you're like, okay, what does this feel like? And so there's this. It's a metaphor that evokes certain kinds of emotions.
Sure.
For our labyrinth here, we stopped at 4 different places around the Alamo and talked about different characters and their stories. So the Alamo there is this story and culture of the Alamo. People have seen movies, and that's what the Alamo is to them. Or, heard songs about Davy Crockett, or there's, the myths of America that tell us about what the Alamo is. But there's a lot of stories that go untold because the Alamo was started way before as a religious settlement. What happened as a result of that? There were people who were free people that once Texas, won something, they were no longer free people because they were in Texas. There were people who had come from far away to participate in this, having heard about it. So people's journeys brought them there a lot of different ways. And it was an impoverished place, but then there are all these very moneyed things going on around it too. People making a lot of money off of it. And so the question for us that day was, whose story is getting told? In the version of the Alamo that people are familiar with, whose story is being told and why?
Right.
And what other stories are there, and why don't they get told? How many stories are there? What would it take for those stories to be told? What about the indigenous people that were here before the mission was started? What about the mission? What about the people who were free and then weren't free? What about the people whose names were changed because someone else told them they had to change their name? What about the people who didn't show up to the fight? What about the people who settled this land long after the fight? There's so many stories that are going on. Some of them are in your face, and some of them are not. And that's a question that is applicable all kinds of places. It's a question that's applicable at the border. Whose story is being told here? Migrants, undocumented immigrants, political parties, victims of crime. Whose story is being told here over time, and why are their stories being elevated? It can be true of Columbus. Like in Columbus, whose stories do we tell, and why do we tell those stories? Whose stories are not being told, and why are they not being told? Is it because we don't want to hear their voices, or we're uncomfortable to hear their voices, or we just don't even know that the stories are there, and if we knew, we would listen? One of the things that I experienced in a really powerful way on this trip is the power of voice. So there's a lot of times people want to spot at the table, or we need to hear someone's voice. And I always kind of, for some reason, understood that in kind of a metaphorical way. Like to hear someone's voice is to just hear their story. And maybe it's through a video, maybe it's through this or whatever. Maybe it's by reading a book. But there were some times throughout this trip, we talked to a lot of different people and heard their stories. And there was this huge change that happened when we went from talking about somebody to hearing somebody tell their own story themselves.
Right.
At one point, we were listening to someone talk, and this is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club in McAllen, Texas. She's a go-getter. She is doing good things, raising millions of dollars, overseeing this thing that I think has thousands of relationships between bigs and littles, big brothers and little brothers in this program. And she brought her daughter with her that day to hear her talk, her 15-year-old daughter or something, because she was out of school. And it's like, I want you to come hear what mom does for a living. And so she came and talked to us. And I don't know if you've ever been, sometimes teenagers get a bad rap.
Sure.
Sometimes, we make assumptions about who they are and their opinions. And so, this girl goes from sitting there quietly, and then eventually we ask her a question, and she talks, and you're just like, oh, wow, she's bright. Oh, wow, she knows things. Oh, wow, she's bringing some truth to the story. And her literally hearing her voice had this way of humanizing her and changing from assumptions into reality. And that happened over and over again in different places, where hearing someone's voice just completely changed the perspective of who they are and their story. And so as Christians, I think part of our work is lifting up stories. And in the Bible, stories are lifted up. We see the story of some of the oppressed people lifted up in the Bible.
Sure.
And the Israelites when they were in Egypt. We see stories of powerful people like King David lifted up. And we believe that these stories really matter because it's in the stories that God is working. And so the way that we tell stories affects the way that we treat each other, also affects the way that we receive truth and receive God. We see that in the way that we read and understand the Bible. And then I want to make one more point before we kind of start moving towards the end of today's podcast. Sure. And I think is that showing up matters. Learning the things that I learned on this trip would have been impossible to do from Columbus, Indiana, or from Crawfordsville, Indiana, where we usually meet for this program.
Sure.
Showing up made a huge difference in our ability to understand the world and to see what's happening there, to hear people's stories. And one of the things that's kind of led me to is well, how can I as a pastor lead Asbury to more places where we can show up and hear people's stories? What's a study tour for a church look like, where we go and hear people's stories? What's a study, and so if anything, day number one was all, using the Alamo as an example, was all about whose stories are we hearing, thinking about those stories. Why are those the stories that we're hearing? And being encouraged to do a little work to hear a broader range of stories than the ones that are immediately told to us.
So, a couple questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Just so we understand basically what the whole premise of the first day was. Did you, by the end of the tour, was it an aha moment to where, oh, I know why we went to the Alamo first? Did that help you in understanding what your total tour was about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that storytelling aspect is here. I mean, the stories are public. They're online. They're historic. Right. There's not a whole lot of controversy. People kind of just accept the stories as they are, even though there are some controversial stories in the background. Sure. And so it was this way to encapsulate the power of story, the importance of story, and the importance of listening.
And the reality of it, I'm asking, is the reality of it, number one, there was a border dispute or a border, I don't want to say war, but it was a confrontation that did happen.
Oh, absolutely. And because a lot of this, Texas and then Colorado and up to a lot of the western part of the United States, before it was the United States, was part of New Spain.
Right.
And so it was actually part of another country. And then because of wars or treaties and different things, then this land all switched hands.
Sure.
And so sometimes for some of the people who are of varying descents, they lived in a place and the border moved on them.
Sure.
And so borders, I think now of borders as being relatively fixed. I
Right.
think if you wanted to move the U.S. border north into parts of Canada, you would have some real trouble doing so.
Right,
If you wanted to say, well, actually, Tijuana is going to be part of the United States now, I think you'd have some real trouble
Sure.
doing so. I mean, we see this kind of in some wars playing out
Sure.
around the world right now that
Right.
borders, to me, it always felt like they were fixed, but they've acted in the history of the United States. Borders have moved on
Sure.
people, and that's part of the story that's not always told.
Right. Just by example, Puerto Rico, for all intents and purposes, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but it's not a state. It's not, but like you said, in order for Puerto Rico to become a state or part of the United States, it would be a big thing, and you'd have to, it'd be something. So we understand that.
And ironically, I think part of that is our love of round numbers. 50 is such a round number that I do think that's part of the psychological border to it.
Right.
Just part. There's way more to the story, obviously.
Sure.
But I think that's part of it.
Sure, but to and just to let everybody know that this first day and the Alamo and all the different stories, it starts to change your perspective.
Yeah,
Correct?
for sure. And what it does is it perks up your ears.
Right.
If you've ever been, it's not quite this way, but like if you've ever been sleeping one time I went backpacking with a friend, and it was the first time I had spent a night in a tent in a long time.
Right.
And so we set up our tents, and I lay, my air mattress out, and I laid on the ground, and then I hear a rustling out there. And we're in Michigan, and I know there's bears in Michigan.
Right.
I'm like, is there a bear out there? That whatever's out there sounds giant.
Right.
But it's really some squirrels hopping around, right?
Right.
So I get my flashlight. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a squirrel there. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what it does is it really just perked us up. Okay,
Yeah,
here's
yeah.
a story. I need to be a good listener.
Your senses rose.
I need to be an active listener as I prepare to engage the fullness of this study tour, but also the fullness of the world.
Right.
That it really had that effect, because in grand total, we only spent maybe 2 or 3 hours at the Alamo,
Right.
Doing some of these group exercises and talking about the stories. And I learned as much about some of the stories by visiting the website before the trip.
Sure.
And then I learned some stuff on the ground that maybe didn't make it on the website.
Sure.
While I was there.
Sure. Well, that's what a good mechanical engineer does, or whatever.
Electrical.
Electrical. Sorry. So I think it's very neat that they use the Alamo to start the tour. I think it is, like you said, it's the story. The United States makes it their story, but there's other stories. And we're not digging on the United States. That's just the way it is. I mean, remember the Alamo. I mean, that famous quote. That's what you get from the Alamo.
Yeah. And honestly, as an uninformed Indiana native, I couldn't have told you if the people fighting at the Alamo who won and who lost.
Right. I don't think anybody could. Yeah.
I know now that the Mexican army won.
Sure.
Against the Texas Republic Army.
Right.
At that spot, but in the end, it was a rally. So remember, the Alamo was a rallying cry that ended up changing the future of the war.
Right.
So it's also like part of the Alamo was also a lost cause that people
Sure.
were committed to until the very end.
Right.
And that as an aspect of the story, I don't think is always fully explored.
Right. Well, I think that one could say that you could look back at the Alamo and find out in your situation how your tour was going to begin, and I think that's I think people need to know that, and that's great to start it out like that. So, do we stop here and go on to the next day in our next episode, or do we have anything else to talk about with this?
No, I think that kind of sets up the first day. As the first day went on, the next thing that we did is we got in vans and we left San Antonio and we drove to McAllen, Texas.
Okay.
So McAllen is very different than San Antonio and is part of the Rio Grande Valley, just north of the U.S.-Mexico border. So we drove down there, we got settled, we had dinner, and then we waited for the next day to begin.
All
so
right.
that was, and they encouraged us to kind of like look out the windows and see how the world changes, because the environment changes. One of the things that surprised me most about McAllen is I kind of thought it was going to be almost like a desert. Like there, like you when you hear stories about people crossing the border,
Sure.
So it happens in Arizona and drier parts of Texas, but in McAllen there was a lot of green. There was a lot of grass and green trees and wildlife. It is a bird watcher's paradise. There are so many birds there and birds that migrate through there that it was. Seeing it was eye opening.
Right.
It's also one of the poorest regions in the United States. And so I kind of thought that we would go and it would just be immediately recognizable as an impoverished area. You can tell something with your eyes.
Sure.
But the places that we stayed, and most of the places, not all the places, but most of the places that we went were very nice places.
Right.
We stayed in a hotel right by the convention center, and it was very nice. And so again, you get this question of like, what story am I hearing?
Right.
Like the demographics tell me that it's an impoverished area, but I keep showing up to these nice areas. Like there's, and next episode we'll get more into the demographics of McAllen in that area. So a little teaser for next time.
Just by what we talked about before the podcast and everything, it sounds like there are some eye-opening experiences that you think, wow, what's happening here, and things like that. But the one thing that I think we should leave with right now is, did you witness a situation where people could coexist?
Where?
In this region of the area, a border town,
like in San Antonio or in McAllen?
Both. I mean, let me rephrase it, because this is off the cuff. The closer you get to the border, is it a place that people can coexist?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what you're ready for. So in San Antonio is 65% Latino,
right,
and Hispanic,
right.
And then you go to McAllen, and McAllen is 85% Latino and Hispanic. So I did talk to Anglo-American people while I was there too. But it's part of it is like, as you're coming to hear these stories and thinking about coexisting, what's your heart?
Right.
What's your willingness to coexist with people? And we'll talk about some cultural experiences that were fun while I was down there too, that are just outside of the norm. Because so 55 miles or so north of McAllen is a border checkpoint. So it's different than a border crossing. Like when you cross a border, the border from Mexico into the United States, you have to have your passport. When you're trying to go north further in Texas, about 55 miles north of that, there's a place where they pulled us over and they're like, "Oh, are you guys citizens? Like, what's going on here?" And we had to tell them what we were doing. So it's like, it's a border checkpoint.
Right.
So if you're south of there, it feels very different,
right?
Because there's a lot of people living in a gray area of immigration status in that area that's not always being checked,
right?
Because you can legally come as a Mexican citizen, you can legally come from Mexico to the United States and visit, just like we can legally go into Mexico and visit, or we can go to Canada and visit. We can go visit all these places, and so the checkpoint is like one place further up the road where we double check and see what's going on. And if you're in between that area, there's some gray area. Sure.
So a little teaser for the upcoming episodes. We do. I will tell you that you do have a story to where people actually cross the border every day.
Yeah.
And
that's part of the life.
Yeah, it's part of the life. And we'll get to that, or we're just going to leave that as a teaser, because it is an interesting story, and you wonder why. We have this, what is an immigration issue per se, but then people are going back and forth, and that's everyday life.
It's more complicated than is presented to us, than the story is told on a regular basis.
All right, let's stop there, and we want to pray.
Yeah, let's pray. God, you are a God of stories. You interact in our story. We are part of your great big story of creation and redemption and one day recreation of this earth. God, help us to be people who are willing to be on the ground, who are willing to be witnesses of things taking place in this life, and help us to be good listeners, hearing the stories of others, digging deeper past the stories that are first presented to us, so that we can love people, we can honor people, and we can see the truth. God, may this brief podcast journey be part of us seeing more broadly. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
For Nick Robinson, I'm Dean O'Neill, and you are on a brand new, not path, but on the ground.
You are on the ground.
You are on the ground with Nick Robinson. Thanks, Nick.